How do you heal things like trauma through the body? How do you use a movement practice and physical challenges to recalibrate your nervous system? How do you embody transformation? That's what we're looking at today. This presentation emerged from our conversation about Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And it's very tempting to look at David Goggins and think that he is an outlier, or your mind starts to assess what he's doing. Is it right? Is it wrong? Do I agree with it? Do I not agree with it? And anytime you do that, you will miss the teachings that he has to offer us. And I propose that David Goggins uses physical challenges to work out less seeable, intangible phenomena like trauma, like repatterning his nervous system, developing mental toughness, what we will call anti-fragility, and becoming a true maverick of transformation. I would also say that the yoga tradition strives for the same thing. And traditional yoga asana was very disciplined, especially pre-postural yoga. There was this idea of tapasya, these spiritual practices and disciplines that were meant to really stretch the body-mind. And these were crazy, wild things, like a yogi holding their arm up above their head, sometimes till it actually atrophied or would start to rot, or standing on one leg for absurd amounts of time. And then you've seen images of the sadhus with the dreadlocks, and they're naked or with a dhoti, and they're living in caves and outside of humanity. So the traditional practices in the East, very similar to the physical challenges that Goggins is going through, with a similar intent. They were going to push the body-mind as far as it can go, and we're going to break through. We're going to become something new. We're going to look at a model we call animal body, human mind, divine spirit. And it's going to give you tools for gaining perspective, so you're less in the whirlpools of the mind, but also less hijacked by the animal body. This is going to take us into polyvagal theory, the nervous system, even a little bit of attachment theory, but it's going to bring us home to inner listening and being able to discern the right dose for transformation in our own bodies and lives. David Goggins will talk a lot about callousing the mind and the savage mind, but I would say that he's operating less from the mind, at least the logical, rational version of mind that's heavily colored by ego and the animal body and nervous system, and he's actually operating from what the yogis will call the higher mind, buddhi. This is the place of witnessing awareness, where you're able to tap into the power of what is and create tremendous feats and accomplishments. So in our model, you have the animal body, which seeks safety, pleasure, and comfort. And then you have the human mind, which is heavily oriented towards the seen, the known, the predictable, and the controllable. And it's divine spirit that pushes you towards growth, expansion, connection, evolution, and metamorphosis. Now, in our last presentation, we talked about Mount Stupid and the 4 stages of competency. And you could see with the animal body seeking comfort, pleasure, safety, ease, and the human mind wanting to see and know and control, both of those would have a knee-jerk reaction to falling off Mount Stupid. They would want to emergency exit the valley of despair. But it's spirit that carries you forward, that's eager for expansion, new territory, and fresh horizons. And you can see that many of Goggins's efforts are driven by this element of spirit. Even in your own life, you'll often not feel comfortable or certain. You'll be frustrated and agitated by not knowing the way or the next step, but something will be driving you forward, and that something is spirit. And when we understand that, we can lean into it, and then we're less driven by the animal body and the human mind, which becomes very limiting. So we're going to pull apart these 3 aspects of self, how they relate to the nervous system, and also how they are interpreted in the yoga tradition. So the animal body is going to be related to the dorsal vagal pathway and the manas. The human mind is going to be related to the sympathetic nervous system and what the yoga tradition calls ahamkara. And then divine spirit is going to be related to the ventral vagal pathway and what the yogis call buddhi. So let's dive a little bit deeper into each one. Animal body is related to the primitive mind, the brainstem, the yoga tradition calls this manas. It's your sensory processing center. It also has knee-jerk reactions. This is related to the dorsal vagal pathway, which is the most primitive part of the nervous system. This aspect, like an animal, seeks comfort and pleasure. It wants safety. And when threatened, it will hijack every system in your body. That's when you feel like you were possessed because someone said something or did something, you were scared about something. And we want to honor this part of ourselves because it keeps us safe. This is how we've survived and evolved as a species. And when we understand it and respond to it respectfully, we actually have a much better relationship to it, and we bring that spaciousness of spirit. Human mind is the logical, rational thinking part of the brain, and it's also the emotional center, including the amygdala and the hippocampus. The yoga tradition would call this aspect of mind ahamkara, and ahamkara means I maker. It's our identity. And this is an interesting distinction from the yoga tradition, that I maker and identity is a vision of self perpetuated by belief. It's not who you are, it's who you believe yourself to be. It's the story of your identity. One of my teachers would liken it to a museum, that it's like you have displays that are front and center, the first thing people see and experience, and then other aspects of self that are literally buried in the basement. And the ones on display are the ones that get the most positive attention. And we all have these different layers of our self and identity. They're not problematic unless they become so rigid and hard or so porous that we don't know who we are. So we want a solid sense of self that also has some flex and give and ability to transform, which again happens when we insert spirit. This layer of embodied experience is related to the sympathetic pathway, and it seeks the known, the predictable, the controllable. Think about how your identity or personality gets a little bit rocked when you can't see, you don't know, you're out of control. To keep this aspect of self in check, we need curiosity and openness and a wonder that also gives the personality that flex. The mind is interesting that it's either being driven by the animal body, and nervous system studies like polyvagal theory really support that premise, or it is open and expanded by divine spirit. Divine spirit is called buddhi in the yoga tradition, and this is a whole body intelligence. It's an intuition and an inner awareness that's very similar to spirit or soul. It relates to the ventral vagal pathway, your ability to feel safe, secure, open, receptive, connected, integrated. This aspect of you seeks growth, expansion, connection, evolution, and metamorphosis. It needs connection as in you coming back to it, developing a relationship with this aspect of self and this nervous system pathway. And it's important to note that this will not happen automatically, especially in our modern culture. You must tend this aspect of your being, this quality of mind, and this pathway of your nervous system. It does have a flavor of swimming upstream. We've talked about hormetic stress and how it's that sweet spot, that right dose that allows you to grow and evolve and become anti-fragile. And it doesn't need to be ultra marathons or cold plunges. When you can discern the right dose, you can choose challenges that are right for you. So how do we measure the right dose? The ventral vagal pathway, buddhi, the higher mind, needs to stay online. It's when you're expansive and receptive, the ability to be with what is, that you know you're in spirit. If you start to go into stories to kind of clamp down, get in that fight flight mode, you're in sympathetic. If you start to shut down, want to run away, numb or freeze, you're in dorsal vagal. In both situations, you've lost that expansiveness of spirit where transformation happens. Now, when you know this, you can train the body-mind to stay spacious during challenge and stress, and then you are widening your window of tolerance. You're opening up that threshold for challenge. And in order to discern the right dose, you need a few things. One, to know the nervous system. So we're going to review it very quickly. And the other thing is to sharpen your inner listening. So your nervous system has two main pathways. One is the sympathetic, commonly called rest and digest or feed and breed. I will call it cool, calm, and content. Your parasympathetic pathway has two pathways inside of it. One is ventral vagal. This is the more modern, upper myelinated portion of the vagus nerve. And this is your safe, social, open, and receptive pathway. This is how you keep buddhi and the higher mind online. The second portion of the vagus nerve is called the dorsal vagal pathway. This is below the respiratory diaphragm in the guts, deeply related to the enteric nervous system, the belly brain. And it's related to survival instincts, including shutdown, freeze, and collapse. So both of those, ventral vagal and dorsal vagal, are part of the parasympathetic pathway and more or less comprised of the vagus nerve. The other pathway is the sympathetic pathway. This is your fight, flight, or fawn response. The three pathways of your nervous system are part of polyvagal theory. And another concept in polyvagal theory is interoception. Interoception is how your body is always scanning the environment and then sending signals up to the brain. And then the brain's trying to make sense of the signals the body is sending. Sometimes your mind tells stories, narratives, explains why you're feeling, how you're feeling, and then also reinforces the feeling. Occasionally, your mind picks a fight with the information coming from your body, and then we judge what we're feeling. We stuff it, or we add a tagline. I feel tired, and that's bad. I feel X, Y, and Z, and I don't want to. Make it go away. Make it stop. So there's an information exchange between the body and mind happening all the time. And the mind is either reinforcing the information coming from the body, and that can be its own vicious cycle or virtuous cycle, or the mind is fighting the information coming from the body. Whatever one is happening, to get off autopilot, you want to open the ventral vagal pathway and buddhi, the higher mind. Then you can see the narrative, the story, what you might be reinforcing. You can also see what you're fighting. And this gives you tremendous agency and healing potential with your body, with your mind, but especially with your nervous system. To make things even more interesting, what you will label as good, bad, desirable, undesirable, safe, dangerous is deeply imprinted in your nervous system. It can be generations old. A lot gets imprinted in utero and during early childhood development. When you really start rubbing up against old neurological habits, the wiring of your nervous system, you will unravel coping mechanisms that can be generations old, generations deep, but it will feel like you're going against your personality. And this is what makes it so challenging. It's also what makes David Goggins' narrative so valuable, is because you see him rewrite his whole life, from the 300-pound exterminator who can barely get off the couch to someone who is running ultra marathons. He really shows us that if he can do it, anyone can do it. But he also shows us how intense and deep and persistent the battle is. You can think of your nervous system like an inner thermostat, and a lot of the settings were there before you were born. They're part of our inheritance from our family, again, in utero and early childhood developments. And that's why resetting the nervous system, repatterning and programming how you handle stress, how you engage in conflict, how you do relationships can be a lifelong process. After 20 years of teaching and practice, I would say that rewriting, rewiring the nervous system and some of these neurobiological patterns is harder than rewriting, rewiring physical patterns. Makes sense, but think about how challenging it is to change your gait, how you walk, or to use your arms and legs and core in a different way than you've done for the last decade or 4. So it's a big commitment. It's almost like an inner archaeological dig. And I want to give you some science to back this up, which is going to take us a little bit like a toe dip into attachment theory. I first heard about this study in Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No. And in that book, he's looking at attachment styles, how we handle stress, and how it contributes to the health or lack thereof in our bodies. And this is the Berkeley Longitudinal Study. It's Main, Kaplan, and Hess. And mothers completed a survey during pregnancy or early infancy. The children were then followed and assessed at multiple stages, including under 12 months, under 6 years, and then about 19 years. The researchers were able to predict the child's attachment style with approximately 75% accuracy based on a survey of the mother. So it just shows you how this gets imprinted over generations. And at age 19, the status held 72% of the time. So it's not that we can't change, it's just that it's hard and it's deeply imprinted, but we can be the ones who change this for many generations. So what does this mean for practice? When you choose to do hard things, whether that's a headstand, lifting weights, the spicy core work we do in classes, or learn a new skill, and you're able to stay open, spacious, and connected, you are rewriting and rewiring your nervous system, not just for yourself, but for generations. You're building self-trust, self-confidence, and agency with your own healing. It doesn't need to be ultra marathons or SEAL training. It can be anything that pushes your buttons, asks you to recalibrate that inner thermostat, and reassess your personality and identity. Animal body and human mind will limit you. Those aspects of self do not like falling off Mount Stupid and having to travel through the valley of despair before you reach the slope of enlightenment. So you've got to lean into spirit, stay in that place of big vision, of openness, receptivity, and curiosity. During office hours, I have questions that I present to students so they can unpack the teachings and also apply them to their lived experience. And here they are for you too. What are some of the stories your animal body and human mind tell when you're in the valley of despair? What are the things that come up that encourage you to exit, to leave the endeavor, to give up? When you know those stories, it's like a preemptive strike. You can do something about them. How do you know spirit is driving? For me, it's when I stay open and spacious and I'm curious. I'm willing to look at things from a different perspective. When I get hot and intense and I have that white knuckle grip on something, I know I'm in ego. When I feel overwhelmed, a little bit of despair, I'm never going to be able to do it, I know I'm in the animal body and dorsal vagal nervous system. Lastly, what strategies do you have for staying open and receptive, especially during moments of challenge? We'll talk about that in another video soon. And then how do you know this is working? You're driving by spirit more consistently. You're able to be open and spacious no matter what is coming your way. Also, when you're challenged, you start struggling for spirit. You start working to maintain that openness, spaciousness, receptivity, and then you are wedging your window of tolerance open. And lastly, you start to, just a little bit, look forward to challenge, chaos, and difficulty because you know it will help you grow.